In the scorching heat of 1879 Tombstone, wealthy widow Helena Carmichael's comfortable life shattered the moment she heard the crack of a whip and saw a man being brutally auctioned like cattle in the town square. Her impulsive decision to buy his freedom for $1,000 would ignite a firestorm of scandal that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. But would it ultimately reveal the true measure of a human soul's worth? The church bell rang 7 times across Tombstone as Helena Carmichael stepped out into the blazing Arizona morning of 1879. Dust swirled around her black dress like tiny dancers in the desert wind. She pulled her shawl tighter, even though the sun already felt hot enough to cook an egg on the wooden sidewalk. Helena walked slowly down Main Street, her boots clicking against the rough boards. 6 months had passed since her husband William died in the mine accident. 6 long months of people telling her what she should do with his money. 6 months of feeling like a bird trapped in a cage made of other people's rules. The town bustled with morning activity. Cowboys rode past on tired horses. Shop owners swept dust from their doorways. Children ran between the buildings chasing a scraggly dog. Everything seemed normal, but Helena felt something different in the air today. Something that made her stomach twist, like a rope. She needed supplies from the general store. Flour, sugar, maybe some fabric for new curtains. Simple things that might help her small house feel less empty. As she walked, she noticed more people than usual heading toward the town square. Their voices carried excitement, like children on Christmas morning. "Big auction today," she heard someone say. "Finest stock in the territory," another voice added. Helena frowned. She knew about cattle auctions and horse sales. Those happened every month. But something felt wrong about the eager way people spoke, something that made her want to turn around and go home. Instead, curiosity pulled her forward like a string attached to her heart. The crowd grew thicker as she approached the square. Men in dusty hats pushed past her. Women whispered behind their hands. Everyone seemed to know something she did not. Helena found herself swept along with the flow of people, like a leaf carried by a stream. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze in her veins. The sharp crack of a whip cut through the morning air. Once, twice, 3 times. Helena pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She had to see what was happening. She had to know why everyone seemed so excited about something that sounded so terrible. What she saw in the town square would change everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. "Step right up, folks!" The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square like thunder. "Fresh stock from down south." Helena squeezed between 2 large men to get a better view. Her mouth fell open in shock. There, chained to a wooden post in the center of the square, stood a young man. His shirt hung in bloody strips. Fresh cuts crossed his dark skin, like angry red lines. The man's eyes caught hers for just 1 second. In that moment, Helena saw something that made her chest tight. Pain, yes. Fear, certainly. But also dignity that refused to break, even under the whip. "This here's prime labor," the auctioneer continued, waving his hat. "Strong back, quick learner, barely been broken in proper." The crowd laughed. Some called out prices like they were buying a horse or a cow. Helena felt sick to her stomach. She had read about such things in newspapers from back east. But seeing it happen right here, in her own town, made her feel like the world had turned upside down. The whip cracked again. The young man stumbled but did not fall. His name, Helena learned from the auctioneer's loud voice, was Daniel Rivers, 25 years old, could read and write, which made him worth more money. "Do I hear $50? The auctioneer called. "50! Someone shouted. "75! 100! The bidding rose like water in a well. Helena watched in horror as human beings bought and sold another human being like he was nothing more than a tool. Her hands shook inside her gloves. Her late husband, William, had always said that every person had worth, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. The whip rose again. Helena saw Daniel brace himself for another blow. Something inside her snapped like a dry twig. "Stop!" Her voice rang out clear and strong across the square. Every head turned toward her. The auctioneer paused with his whip in the air. Even Daniel looked surprised. Helena felt hundreds of eyes staring at her, but she did not care anymore. "Stop whipping this man," she declared, stepping forward through the crowd. "I will buy him." Silence fell over the square, like a heavy blanket. Helena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel the shock radiating from the crowd like heat from a fire. But there was no turning back now. She had opened her mouth, and the words had come out. Now she had to see where they would lead her. What price would she have to pay for following her conscience instead of the crowd? Thunder rolled across the desert sky as Helena counted out crisp dollar bills onto the auctioneer's trembling palm. The man's hands shook so badly he dropped 3 bills twice before managing to stuff them into his leather pouch. Nobody had ever seen that much money change hands in Tombstone's dusty square. "Ma'am, with all due respect," the auctioneer stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool wind that preceded the storm. "Folks might get the wrong idea about this here purchase." Helena's fingers worked quickly at the heavy iron chains binding Daniel's wrists. The metal felt ice cold against her gloved hands, and she noticed how the shackles had rubbed raw wounds around his ankles. Each link that fell to the ground rang like a church bell, announcing freedom. "Let them think whatever they please," she replied, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "A person's thoughts belong to them, just as their freedom should." Daniel stood perfectly still as the last chain dropped away, afraid that any sudden movement might wake him from what surely had to be a dream. 3 years of captivity had taught him that hope was dangerous, yet this strange woman in her fine black dress had just paid more money than most folks saw in a lifetime. "Why?" he whispered, the word barely audible above the growing wind. His dark eyes searched her face for answers that made sense in a world that rarely did. Helena pulled a clean handkerchief from her small purse and handed it to him. The white fabric was softer than anything Daniel had touched since his capture, and he stared at it as if it might disappear. "Because 1879 should be too late in our nation's history for scenes like this," she said simply. "Because my late husband always believed that a man's character mattered more than the color of his skin or the circumstances that brought him low." The crowd began to scatter as fat raindrops started falling, but their whispered conversations carried on the wind. Helena caught fragments of their words. "Scandalous. Improper. That peculiar widow woman has lost her mind entirely." Daniel noticed how she flinched at each cruel comment, though she tried to hide it. "Ma'am, I appreciate what you've done more than words can say, but those folks aren't going to forget this. They'll make your life difficult." A bolt of lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating Helena's determined face. "Mr. Rivers, I've discovered that living with a difficult reputation is far easier than living with a guilty conscience." As the rain began in earnest, washing the dust from the square and the blood from Daniel's torn shirt, both of them wondered what tomorrow would bring to a town that had just witnessed something it wasn't ready to understand. Pastor Williams knocked on Helena's door exactly 17 days after the auction, his wife Cordelia standing beside him with a face that could sour fresh milk. Helena opened the door to find them both wearing expressions of grave concern, as if they'd come to discuss a death in the family. "Mrs. Carmichael," the pastor began, removing his black hat and clutching it against his chest, "we need to have a serious conversation about your recent acquisition." Helena invited them into her modest parlor, where Daniel had been reading by the fireplace. He rose immediately when the visitors entered, but Cordelia gasped and stepped backward as if she'd encountered a rattlesnake. He's in your house," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. "Helena, what will people think?" The past 2 weeks had been a strange adjustment for both Helena and Daniel. He'd insisted on sleeping in the small storage room behind the kitchen, refusing her offer of the proper guest bedroom. Every morning, he rose before dawn to tend the neglected garden behind her house, coaxing life from soil that hadn't seen care since her husband's death. "People will think whatever serves their own purposes," Helena replied calmly, pouring tea for her unwelcome guests. Daniel has proven himself to be respectful, hard-working, and more polite than most of the so-called gentlemen in this town. Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Carmichael, I'm sure Mr. Rivers is a fine individual, but appearances matter. The ladies of the church auxiliary have expressed serious concerns about your reputation. Daniel spoke up from where he stood near the doorway. Perhaps I should leave while you discuss this matter. Absolutely not, Helena said firmly. This concerns you as much as anyone. Please, sit down. Cordelia Williams looked ready to faint. Helena, you cannot possibly expect us to conduct church business in the presence of a free man who works for wages and minds his own affairs? Helena's voice carried a sharp edge that made both visitors straighten. Mrs. Williams, Daniel has shown me more courtesy in 2 weeks than your husband's congregation has in 2 years of widowhood. The pastor's face reddened. Now see here, Helena. I understand you're still grieving William's loss, but this arrangement goes against all proper social order. What example does this set for our young people? Daniel had heard enough. With respect, Pastor Williams, the example it sets is that all people deserve dignity and fair treatment. If that troubles your congregation, perhaps they should examine their own hearts rather than Mrs. Carmichael's actions. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising another of the afternoon storms that had become common since Helena's dramatic purchase. The sound seemed to emphasize the tension filling the small room. Cordelia Williams stood abruptly, her teacup rattling against its saucer. I've heard quite enough, Helena. Unless you remedy this situation immediately, I'm afraid the ladies' auxiliary will have no choice but to exclude you from our activities. Helena rose as well, her chin lifting with quiet dignity. Mrs. Williams, I believe that would be their loss far more than mine. As the pastor and his wife prepared to leave, Pastor Williams turned back one final time. Helena, I pray you'll reconsider before this situation brings consequences you can't undo. After the door closed behind them, Daniel looked at Helena with deep concern. They're not going to let this rest. In a town this size, being shut out of the church community means being shut out of everything. Helena walked to the window and watched the dark clouds gathering over the desert. Daniel, I've learned something important these past weeks. I'd rather stand alone with my principles than belong to a group that demands I abandon them. But even as she spoke these brave words, Helena wondered if she truly understood what isolation in a frontier town could cost her. Flames danced across angry faces as torches lit up the dark street outside Helena's home. Sheriff Reynolds stood at the front of a growing crowd, his badge catching the firelight like a warning. Behind him, at least 20 men clutched their burning sticks, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. We know you're in there, Mrs. Carmichael, shouted Jeremiah Crenshaw, the richest man in Tombstone after Helena herself. His expensive boots clicked against the wooden porch as he stepped forward. This madness has gone on long enough. Inside the small house, Daniel pressed his back against the kitchen wall, listening to the angry voices outside. His heart pounded like thunder in his chest. Helena stood by the front window, her hands shaking as she watched the crowd grow bigger and meaner. Ma'am, you should let me slip out the back, Daniel whispered. This is about me, not you. Helena turned away from the window, her green eyes blazing with determination. No, Daniel. We face this together, or we don't face it at all. The crowd outside began chanting ugly words that made Helena's stomach turn. Someone threw a rock at her window, making a spiderweb crack across the glass. Another voice called out threats about what happened to people who didn't follow the town's rules. Sheriff Reynolds knocked hard on the front door, making the whole house shake. Mrs. Carmichael, I need you to open this door right now. People are saying things about you and that man, bad things that could get someone hurt. Helena's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, pushed through the crowd with her 3 small children clinging to her skirts. Please, Helena, she called out. Think about what you're doing to the rest of us. My husband might lose his job at the bank because I defended you. The words hit Helena like a slap across the face. She hadn't thought about how her choices might hurt other people in town. Now innocent families were paying the price for her decision to help Daniel. Daniel moved closer to Helena, his voice barely above a whisper. I can leave tonight. Walk to the next town. Start over somewhere else. You don't have to lose everything because of me. And let them win? Helena asked, her voice getting stronger. Let them decide who deserves freedom and who doesn't. Outside, Crenshaw's voice rose above the others. We found out the truth about your hired man, Mrs. Carmichael. He's not who he says he is. He's been lying to you from the very beginning. Helena felt her blood turn to ice water. What truth? What lies? She looked at Daniel, searching his face for answers, but all she saw was fear and something that looked like shame. The crowd began moving closer to the house, their torches casting dancing shadows on the walls. Someone started counting down from 10, like they were planning to break down the door when they reached 0. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. There's something I haven't told you, he said quietly. Something about my past that changes everything. Helena stared at him as the counting outside reached 5, 4, 3. What secret had Daniel been hiding that could make this night even more dangerous than it already was? 2, 1. The crowd's chanting stopped suddenly as Daniel threw open the front door and stepped outside, his hands raised high above his head. You want the truth about me? Daniel called out, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Then you'll get it, but you might not like what you hear. Sheriff Reynolds stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. Son, you need to be real careful about what you say next. Daniel reached slowly into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, yellowed piece of paper. Even in the flickering torchlight, Helena could see it was some kind of official document. My name is Daniel Washington Rivers. I was born free in Sacramento, California, in 1854. Crenshaw laughed loudly, but it wasn't a happy sound. Free? Boy, you were sold at auction just like any other piece of property. Because I was kidnapped, Daniel said, his voice getting stronger. Stolen from my home and sold into slavery by men who wanted my family's blacksmith shop. Men who couldn't stand to see a black family doing better than they were. The crowd began murmuring among themselves. Some looked confused, others angry, and a few seemed ashamed. Helena stepped outside to stand beside Daniel, her heart racing but her mind clear. Show them the rest, she said quietly. Daniel unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. This is my deed of ownership for Rivers Metalworks in Sacramento, the business my father and I built together before they burned it down and took everything from us. Sheriff Reynolds took the paper and held it close to his torch. His eyes grew wide as he read. This is real. Signed by the county clerk and everything. They killed my father right in front of me, Daniel continued, his voice breaking slightly. Then they put chains on me and sold me to traders heading south. I spent 3 years working fields in Texas before I was brought here to be sold again. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd, her face pale. But if you were free, if you owned a business, then I was never legally a slave at all, Daniel finished. Every day I spent in chains was a crime. Every person who bought and sold me was breaking the law. The crowd fell completely silent. Even Crenshaw seemed shocked by this revelation. Helena could see people looking at each other with uncertainty, realizing that everything they thought they knew was wrong. I have more proof, Daniel said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a small photograph showing a well-dressed young man standing proudly beside a large forge. This is me at my shop 3 years ago, before they destroyed my life. Sheriff Reynolds studied the photograph, then looked back at Daniel. The resemblance was unmistakable. Why didn't you tell anyone this before? Who would have believed me? Daniel asked. A man being sold at auction, claiming he was really a successful businessman? Would you have believed that story? Helena felt tears running down her cheeks as she realized the incredible courage it had taken for Daniel to survive everything he'd been through. But she also felt anger burning in her chest like fire. So, when I bought Daniel's freedom, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the night air, I wasn't just doing a good deed, I was correcting a terrible crime that had been done to an innocent man. Crenshaw's face turned red with embarrassment and rage. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. The arrangement between you two still isn't proper. What's not proper, Helena shot back, is a town that would rather destroy two people than admit they were wrong about something important. The crowd began to shift and break apart as people started walking away. Some looked ashamed, others confused, but most just seemed tired of the whole situation. Sheriff Reynolds folded up Daniel's papers and handed them back. "I reckon this changes things considerably," he said quietly. "Mr. Rivers, I believe you have some legal rights that need to be sorted out." As the torches disappeared into the darkness, Helena and Daniel stood alone on the porch. But instead of feeling victorious, Helena wondered if the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. Sheriff Reynolds stepped back as angry voices filled the night air around Helena's house. The torches made scary shadows dance on the wooden walls, while more people gathered in the dusty street. Helena's heart pounded like a drum as she watched Jeremiah Crenshaw push his way to the front of the crowd. "Mrs. Carmichael," Crenshaw's voice cut through the darkness like a sharp knife, "this has gone too far. A proper lady doesn't live with his kind." Daniel moved closer to Helena, his hands tight into fists. She could see the fire in his eyes, the same look a wild horse gets when cornered. But something else was there too, something that made her stomach twist with worry. "His kind." Helena's voice shook with anger. "What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Crenshaw?" The crowd grew quiet, waiting. Mrs. Ashford whispered something to the woman next to her. A man near the back spat into the dirt and crossed his arms. Helena felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong word away from falling. "You know exactly what I mean," Crenshaw sneered. "This boy ain't what he pretends to be. I've been asking around, doing some checking. Tell them, Daniel. Tell them what you really are." Daniel's face went pale in the torchlight. Helena saw his hands shake, saw him look toward the back door like he wanted to run. The silence stretched on and on, until it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Daniel started, then stopped. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Go ahead, boy," Crenshaw pushed. "Tell them about California. Tell them about the fire. Tell them why you really came here." Helena watched Daniel's face change, saw years of pain and fear wash over it like storm clouds. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him it didn't matter what Crenshaw said. But something in Daniel's eyes stopped her cold. "You're right," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. "I haven't told the whole truth." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Helena felt her world start to spin. "I was born free in Sacramento," Daniel continued, reaching into his shirt. "My father owned the biggest blacksmith shop in town. My mother taught at the school for colored children. We had money, respect, a good life." He pulled out something small and dark, a picture wrapped in cloth. "Until men like you decided we had too much. They came at night, burned everything, killed my father, sold me south to teach me my place." His voice broke on the last words. Helena stared at the picture he held out. Even in the flickering light, she could see a young man in fine clothes, standing next to a forge, tools in his hands, pride in his eyes. "That's me," Daniel said. 3 years ago, before they took everything." The crowd shuffled their feet. Someone coughed. Crenshaw's face turned red with anger. "Lies," he shouted. "Pretty stories won't change what you are." But Helena saw doubt creeping into some faces. She saw the way Mrs. Murphy looked at Daniel differently now, remembering how he'd saved her daughter from a runaway horse. She saw old Tom the barber nodding slowly, thinking of the free work Daniel had done fixing his broken fence. "What I am," Daniel said quietly, "is a man, just like you." Spring flowers bloomed around Helena's house as she sat on her front porch 6 months later, watching Daniel work in the garden he'd made from nothing. The morning sun felt warm on her face, and for the first time since William died, she felt truly happy. A letter lay open in her lap, news that changed everything. A lawyer from Sacramento had been looking for Daniel for 2 years. His father's business partner wanted to rebuild their shop and needed Daniel to help. There was money waiting, a chance at the life he'd lost. Mrs. Carmichael? Daniel walked up the porch steps, dirt on his hands and a smile on his face. The tomatoes are coming in real good. Mrs. Murphy says she'll take 2 baskets for her restaurant. Helena folded the letter carefully. She knew she had to tell him, but the words stuck in her throat like honey. How do you tell someone you care about that it's time for them to leave? Daniel, sit with me a moment. He cleaned his hands on his work shirt and sat down on the step below her. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of Tombstone waking up, hammers ringing, horses nickering, children playing in the street. I got some news today, Helena said, holding out the letter. About your old life in California. Daniel read slowly, his lips moving with the words. Helena watched his face change as he understood what the letter meant. Hope and fear fought in his eyes like 2 cats in a bag. They want me back, he whispered. They need you back, Helena corrected. There's a difference. Daniel set the letter down and looked at her with those deep, thoughtful eyes that had first caught her attention that terrible day in the town square. What do you think I should do? Helena smiled, remembering the scared, broken man she'd bought for $1,000. Now she saw someone strong and sure of himself, someone who had choices again. I think, she said carefully, that you should do what makes you happy, not what makes me happy, or what the town expects, or what anyone else wants. Just you. They sat quiet for a while, listening to the bees buzz in the flowers and the wind whisper through the desert sage. Finally, Daniel spoke. You saved my life that day, not just from the whip, but from forgetting who I was. And you saved mine, Helena replied. You reminded me that doing what's right matters more than doing what's easy. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. I made this for you, to remember. Helena unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving of 2 hands holding up a bird with spread wings, ready to fly. The work was beautiful, detailed, made with love and skill. It's perfect, she whispered, tears making her voice shake. The bird is me, Daniel explained. And the hands, well, they're yours. But also everyone who helped along the way. Mrs. Murphy, Tom the barber, even Sheriff Reynolds. Helena held the carving close to her heart. When will you leave? Next week, when the stagecoach comes through. She nodded, proud and sad at the same time. Good. It's time. As the sun climbed higher in the bright Arizona sky, Helena understood something important. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't keeping them close, but helping them find their wings. Sometimes, love means letting go. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing changes not just one life, but everyone who witnesses it. Like ripples in a pond, kindness spreads outward, touching shores you never imagined. The desert wind carried the scent of possibility, and Helena Carmichael smiled, knowing that some stories never really end. They just begin again somewhere else.